Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with Sheila Ellis of Scott City, Kansas. Can you just tell me a little bit about your background and your involvement within the cattle industry?
My grandparents farmed and ranched, and I usually went and spent my summers with them always. And then I married my husband right out of high school, and we've always farmed and ranched.
So what do you feel are the major issues standing in the way of fair cattle markets today?
The number one issue is the packer concentration, because it creates nearly a complete lack of competition. There is just a massive lack of competition when only 4 buyers buy and process somewhere between 80 and 85% of the finished cattle. And I think the second closest would be the importing of less safe, poor quality, cheap foreign beef, because it doesn't have to be labeled with its country of origin, which isn't important just to the fair pricing. It is important because foreign beef doesn't have to be raised to the standards that we put our beef under for protecting human health and safety by the careful use of antibiotics and other medications the U.S. cattleman follows. The less safe, lower quality meat being mixed with our higher quality beef lowers our quality and safety, but then they're still putting that product label on that says U.S., and it's sold at the retail prices that should be for the higher quality, safer product. And the consumer is none the wiser except in the taste.
What do you feel are some solutions that could be implemented to fix these issues?
I think some really good solutions would be to get the Crime Act made into law, and then also enforcement of our antitrust laws and prosecuting violators for doing it, and breaking up the market monopolies.
You mentioned that we import beef from countries that aren't up to the same standards of basically American beef. What are your thoughts on Emcool?
I think it needs to be, because I believe the consumers have a right to know where the beef they're purchasing is born, raised, and slaughtered. And I don't understand why they draw the line at beef. Cool is in effect for lamb and chicken and goat, wild and farm-raised fish and shellfish. It's for fresh and frozen fruits and vegetables and even nuts. Mm-hmm. And other than it's opposed by the packers and the politicians they lobby, there's no reasonable argument for singling out beef. And American consumers have more information about where their car parts and their children's toys come from than the beef they're putting in their family's body.
You mentioned packer concentration. What are your thoughts on the DOJ investigation of our 4 big beef processors?
I really believe that if the DOJ doesn't find and prosecute violations, it would be because they've made a decision to ignore the evidence of rampant repeated violations. I just don't think if you really want to see it that you can miss it.
You have done some extensive research in the past regarding the threat of smuggled in meat to America and how that would affect producers and also our food supply chain. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah. Well, here in late June, I saw a notice from the Custom Border Patrol that they had seized 20,000 pounds of smuggled animal products from China between April 6th and June 6th at LA Long Beach Seaport. And so I just did some further research and found that in a typical day, nationwide, the Custom and Border Patrol seizes and quarantines 4,695 prohibited plant, meat, animal byproduct, and soil commodities, and they also intercept 314 insect pests at U.S. ports of entry. And I also, in looking, found several large seizures, and the largest was the 1 million pounds of food product that was concealed in unrefrigerated containers, and it was mostly cured pork, and they concealed it in ramen noodles and tea bags and even Thai from China. And that's a lot. Similar to the Holcomb fire investigation, we're 16 months down the road from them finding 1 million pounds of smuggled food product. And that was reported in March of 2019 that the USDA was investigating that, but I can't find any information that the investigation was completed, charges were filed, or anything. And CBP has said that it has a very high bar that they have to reach to charge the exporting country, such as China, and it's more likely they'll charge the importer or fine them, actually, is what it said. And CBP didn't even publicly name the importers in the news releases, and when you do find that they've fined somebody, they're pretty minimal. I just think that with a seizure of 1 million pounds of smuggled products, that it's highly unlikely that the Chinese government was unaware of that pork being exported at a time when their country was and still is suffering pork shortages due to their African swine flu outbreak. And CBC is obviously catching a lot of smuggled commodities, but I believe it's naive to believe that they intercept every attempt. So the biological threats within cargo from China that may be missed causes a huge concern, in my opinion, that China may be trying to attack the safety of our animal agriculture health with infectious diseases. And China is just like Brazil and Namibia. They have foot and mouth disease. Their most prevalent infectious diseases are the African swine fever, and they've got classical swine fever, Newcastle disease, the foot and mouth disease, of course, highly pathogenic avian influenza, and swine vesicular disease. And then they've got a new one called G4 Eurasian avian-like H1N1. And there was just a study put out, and that's why I got onto this one in June of this year, that states that the new G4 has the essential hallmarks of being highly adapted to infecting humans. And so on this issue, I think for sure we need to be pushing Congress to provide more funding to increase the number of CBP agricultural specialist inspectors with canines, so CBP has the ability to inspect more containers coming from China. The nearly 5,000 average daily seizures isn't our biggest risk. It's the smuggled commodities that they may be missing for lack of sufficient personnel.
Consumers have experienced record price gouging in their grocery stores at the meat counters for the past few months. Since then, meat prices have declined somewhat. However, they have yet to return to pre-COVID-19 levels. Do you feel there's a chance we could price ourselves out of a product if we don't see retail beef prices return to pre-COVID-19 levels?
I think we could be priced out of a product, but I believe we really need to differentiate ourselves as producers from the packers, because if our product is priced out at the retail market, it will be because the packers price gouged the retailers while they reverse price gouge the producers. Producers have absolutely no control over the retail price consumers pay, and I believe we really need to be getting that message out, because the Holcomb fire last year and COVID-19 have allowed the packers to exploit both ends of the market to their best advantage. Just as with COVID-19 after the Holcomb fire plant, packers used the loss of processing capacity to run down the cash price they paid the independent cattle producer and up the retail prices. And all the while, the packing plants stayed near pre-fire capacity, and I looked up the data on it, and it increased the amount that they were processing by running additional shifts at remaining processing plants. But the packers actually processed the largest monthly amount of beef in October of 2019 while Holcomb was still down. And they produced more in November and December than was produced in February, March, April, and June of 2019.
Earlier this spring, President Trump made the comment that he would like to terminate trade deals where we import cattle and beef into America. What are your thoughts on this statement? And what are your thoughts on cattle and beef imports overall?
Well, I don't really feel like that Secretary Perdue is following President Trump's his executive order for America First. Like with the beef and cattle import, it really defies rational logic that Sonny Perdue's USDA has decided to allow beef to be imported from two countries with foot and mouth disease, Brazil and Namibia, and when it's not present in the U.S. at all. And I don't see allowing imports, how that fits into the executive order of putting America first. And Secretary Perdue allowing that meat into the U.S. is essentially putting the entire U.S. trillion-dollar agriculture industry at risk, especially considering without packer concentration disrupting our food chain, U.S. cattlemen produce more than enough meat to fill American consumer demands, but also export demands.
Earlier you mentioned educating consumers. What are your thoughts on our current beef checkoff program and the referendum that has now been brought up, the petition to bring about a referendum?
Personally, I support it because I don't believe that the checkoff program is doing what it was doing initially. I think it's just outlived its usefulness, and it's just being abused. Like so many other things that start with good intention, it's been used in such a way that it's no longer serving the purpose it was intended for.
What are your thoughts on Senator Chuck Grassley's 5014 bill to increase negotiated cash trade?
I believe it's imperative because the markets have shown for years that using a voluntary percentage of negotiated cash sales to establish the cash market is not working. When some areas like down in Texas only have 5% and other areas like Iowa have 50%, that clearly shows it's not working. And even if they ended up compromising it to a minimum 30-14 and we could work for the 50-14 at the next mandatory price reporting authorization, it's an important step to help independent cattlemen stay in business. And this kind of ties to the checkoff too, but the hypocrisy of the groups and the politicians opposing the 50-14 or any negotiated percentage is just glaring. They say they oppose 50-14 because it's creating a mandate in the industry, yet they're the same groups coming out immediately opposing the petition to invoke the up or down vote on the mandatory checkoff. So, in one hand, they're going, we can't have mandates in the industry, but on the other hand, a program that benefits them, they're going, we can't take this mandate away. And it's because those groups are very heavily funded by the checkoff dollars that cattle producers are mandated to pay.
If you could sum it up into one sentence, what does the cattle industry need most today?
Fair markets and more competition, in which the independent cattle producer who puts the majority of the work into getting the beef to market receive a fair share of the profit instead of the packers, and those playing the paper market at CME receive all the benefits from the producer's work.
Do you feel that our industry is in danger of becoming vertically integrated if some kind of substantial changes aren't made?
I believe there's the potential. I think it would be harder than some of the other industries just because of the way pasturing and grasslands work, but I think that's their goal.
Do you think that fake meat alternatives are a threat to our industry?
I do think it's a threat, but I think it's a threat because it's not meat, it's vegetable protein, so they're misleading the consumers in the same way that not labeling meat with country of origin labels is misleading. And then instead of the vegetable protein producers labeling and marketing their product on its attributes, they've chosen marketing techniques that is attacking our superior product. And all consumers really need to do is look at their ingredient list on the vegetable proteins to understand why it is an inferior product, particularly if they're concerned about putting unnatural ingredients into their family's meals. Beef has one ingredient, beef. And if you look at those labels, there's all this chemical stuff that they usually are trying to avoid. And this is probably something a lot of people haven't caught, but most of the vegetable protein products have a higher fat content than natural lean cuts, and they exceed the American Heart Association low fat guidelines for a heart healthy diet.
That is all I have for questions. Is there any closing statements you want to make or anything else you want to touch on regarding our cattle industry and our cattle markets?
We're at 80 to 85% being controlled by 4 companies, and in 1977, 25% control was held by the big conglomerates. And if COVID-19 has done nothing else, it showed us how important less concentration is to keeping our food supply chains viable.